Have you ever received a call from someone who's already dead? Daniel Harker's phone rang at exactly 12:41 every single night, the number flashing on the screen. His father's, but his father had been buried 3 years ago. When Daniel finally answered, he didn't hear his father's voice. He heard his own, begging for help, screaming like something was tearing him apart. At first, he thought it was a cruel prank. But when investigators traced the signal, they discovered something terrifying. The calls weren't coming from another state or another phone tower. They were coming from inside Daniel's own apartment. And every night, the voice grew louder, the warnings clearer. Until finally, Daniel realized the calls weren't just warnings. They were a countdown. So, what happens when the voice on the other end of the line is your own? Daniel Harker had never liked answering the phone after midnight. Calls at that hour usually meant one of two things, an emergency or a mistake. But when his cell buzzed on the nightstand at 12:41, the screen lit up with a number he recognized instantly. It was his father's number. His father had been dead for 3 years. Daniel sat upright in bed, heart slamming against his chest. For a moment, he considered letting it ring, convincing himself it was a glitch, some database recycling of numbers. But it rang again. The same contact photo appeared on the screen. His father, smiling faintly in a worn flannel shirt, standing in the backyard of the old house in Maine. Hand trembling, Daniel swiped to accept. At first, there was silence. Then a sound of breath. A sharp inhale, ragged, like someone gasping through water. "Dad," Daniel whispered, his throat dry. The line crackled. And then he heard it, not his father's voice. His own. It was unmistakably him, his tone, his cadence, even the tiny rasp that came when he was nervous. But this voice wasn't calm, it was desperate. "Help me, please, he's here." "Oh God, he's..." A scream tore through the speaker, raw and high-pitched. Before the line went dead, Daniel's phone dropped onto the sheets. His heart thudded against his ribs as sweat slicked his palms. He told himself it had to be some cruel prank, maybe a hacker splicing recordings from his voicemail. But how could they know to call from his father's number? He didn't sleep. The next morning, Daniel sat at his kitchen table staring at the phone. He called the number back. "This number is no longer in service," the automated message replied, robotic and final. But that night, at exactly the same time, the phone rang again. He answered. Once again, it was his own voice, only this time, he sounded like he was whispering in the dark. "Daniel," the voice said, trembling, "don't go downstairs." Daniel froze. His apartment was 2 levels, and the creaking stairs were visible from where he sat on the couch. He hadn't planned on going downstairs, but hearing his own voice warning him, his chest locked tight. The line filled with static and then silence. Daniel set the phone down, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He told himself he was overreacting, that this was just some elaborate scam or cruel coincidence. But deep down, some old primal instinct told him something was terribly wrong. On the 3rd night, he decided not to answer. He let the call ring until it stopped. But almost immediately, the voicemail icon appeared. Against his better judgment, Daniel played the message. His voice filled the room. This time it was louder, distorted with terror. "Run." And then banging noises like fists against walls, followed by a final blood-curdling scream. Daniel's phone slipped from his hands. He bolted every lock in his apartment, shut the blinds, and sat up until dawn with the lights on. His job at the insurance office barely registered the next day. He stared blankly at screens while his coworkers chatted, their voices muffled and far away. That evening, he went to the police. He showed them the call logs, the voicemail. The officer on duty, a stout man with tired eyes, listened with faint irritation. "Could be a spoofing scam," he said, clicking his pen. "Criminals can make it look like the call is coming from anywhere, even numbers of the deceased." But the voice, Daniel insisted, it's me. It's me begging for help. How would they have that? The officer leaned back. Could be people can synthesize voices these days. Look, unless there's a direct threat, there's not much we can do. I can file a report if it'll make you feel better. Daniel signed the paperwork, but it didn't make him feel better. That night, the phone rang again. And again, he let it go to voicemail. But instead of his voice pleading, this time it was different. The recording was faint, filled with static, but he could still make it out. Footsteps echoing on wooden stairs. His stairs. He played the message again, holding the phone closer, his blood running cold. Yes, that hollow creak, that was his staircase. Someone or something was inside his apartment. Daniel grabbed a baseball bat from his closet, heart pounding, and searched every room. Every door was locked, every window latched. The apartment was empty. But when he returned to his phone, a new voicemail notification blinked. The timestamp said it had been left less than 2 minutes ago. He pressed play. His own voice whispered, "Stop looking. You'll see him too soon." Daniel didn't sleep at all after that voicemail. The whisper of his own voice felt like it had crawled under his skin and stayed there. By morning, his apartment felt poisoned. Every shadow on the wall looked like it might move. Every creak of the wood seemed deliberate. He packed a duffel bag and left, deciding he would spend a few nights at a hotel until he could figure this out. But no amount of distance seemed to matter. The first night at the hotel, the call came again, 12:41 and sharp. He almost threw the phone against the wall, but something stronger than fear kept him from silencing it. He needed to know. He needed to hear it, he answered. This time, the voice wasn't screaming. It wasn't whispering either. It sounded broken. "Daniel, he's in the room with me." Daniel's breath caught. "What room?" He whispered into the receiver, though his throat felt locked tight. On the line, there was a sound, a door hinge groaning, footsteps crossing a floor. And then another voice, low and guttural, not his own. "Just one word, soon." The call ended. Daniel sat in the dark hotel room, staring at the glowing phone screen as his heart clawed at his ribs. He couldn't run from this. Wherever he went, the calls would follow. The next day, he went back to the police. This time he demanded escalation. After hours of waiting and retelling the story to increasingly skeptical faces, they finally referred him to a forensics investigator who specialized in digital crimes. A man named Carter Linky, glasses slipping down his nose, with a kind of restless energy that made Daniel uneasy. Carter examined the call logs, ran traces, checked the metadata on the voicemails. After half an hour, he leaned back in his chair. "This doesn't make sense," Carter muttered. "What doesn't?" "These calls aren't bouncing off external towers. They're not routed from anywhere outside. Every single one of them is originating from the same source." Daniel leaned forward, palms damp. "Where?" Carter hesitated. Then he swiveled the monitor so Daniel could see. The trace blinked red on the map, a pinpoint locked on a single address. Daniel's address. His stomach dropped. "No, that's not possible. I wasn't even home last night." Carter adjusted his glasses. "I'm telling you the data doesn't lie. These calls are being sent directly from within your apartment. Or maybe I should say under your apartment." Daniel's skin went cold. "There's no basement," Carter shrugged. "Might be wiring, might be an old line. I've seen strange stuff. But if you want answers, we could set up some monitoring equipment, tap into the line, see if we can capture more data." Daniel agreed. At this point, he would have agreed to anything. That night, Carter came to the apartment with 2 laptops, a tangle of wires, and a recording device. They set everything up in Daniel's living room. Carter cracked open a can of soda and tried to lighten the mood. "If this is a prank, we'll catch the bastard. If it's some kind of tech glitch, we'll fix it. And if it's..." He trailed off, giving Daniel a nervous half-smile. Well, then we'll know it's something else. Midnight crawled closer. The two men sat in silence, the only sound the faint hum of Carter's equipment. 12:41 meant the phone buzzed. Daniel's chest locked up. Carter nodded, whispering, "Answer it." With trembling fingers, Daniel swiped. At first, only static. Then breathing. His own breathing. But not sensed. Faster. More desperate. "Please," the voice cried. "Please, Daniel." "He's here again. He's right behind me. Don't turn around." Daniel froze. The words slid into his brain like ice water. He didn't dare move. Carter mouthed, "What's it saying?" But Daniel couldn't answer. The voice on the phone broke into frantic sobs. And then, through the speaker, came something else. A second voice, low, wet, like a growl formed in a throat not meant to speak. "Closer," it said. Daniel's stomach twisted violently. Carter's laptop started flickering, screens of code blurring, files opening and closing by themselves. One of the recorders picked up a new frequency, screeching so loud they both covered their ears, and then silence. The call had ended. Daniel lowered the phone, gasping for air. Carter was pale, his hands shaking as he typed. That wasn't a scam. That wasn't spoofing. He pointed at the monitor. "The signal had spiked in your apartment. It didn't come from outside. It came from inside this room." Daniel felt something shift in the air, then, like the weight of the room had changed. He could smell something faint, metallic, and sour, creeping up from the floorboards, a smell he recognized from childhood. The smell of his father's workshop. The smell grew stronger as the night went on, seeping into the living room like an invisible fog. Daniel knew it too well. That metallic tang, that faint sting at the back of his throat. He remembered being a boy in his father's workshop, the smell of rusted tools, old sawdust, and something else he had never been able to name. Carter sat hunched over the laptop, his face pale in the glow. "The signal came from directly under us," he muttered. "But you said this building doesn't have a basement?" "It doesn't," Daniel said, but even as he said it, doubt gnawed at him. The building was old, a converted boarding house from the early 1900s. Who knew what lay beneath its foundations? Carter pulled a flashlight from his bag. "We should check." Daniel's skin prickled. Every instinct screamed no, but then his phone buzzed again. 12:41, a Mevi caller, ID glowed. Daniel's breath hitched. He didn't want to answer, not with Carter watching, not with that smell in the air. But his finger moved anyway, like the choice was no longer his. The voice came instantly this time. His voice, but hoarse, breaking. "Daniel, don't let him open it." The line went dead. Carter stood frozen, the flashlight trembling in his hand. "Open what?" he whispered. The sound answered for them. A dull, dragging scrape came from the corner of the living room, where the old carpet didn't quite meet the wall. The noise of wood against wood, something shifting. Daniel's stomach turned as Carter yanked the carpet back. Beneath was a square outline, a wooden hatch flush with the floorboards. No hinges visible, but the seam was clear enough. "Jesus," Carter muttered. "You didn't know this was here?" Daniel shook his head, though part of him wasn't surprised. Some childhood memory stirred a night he'd woken up to the sound of knocking under the floor. His father had told him it was the pipes, but Daniel remembered lying awake for hours, convinced someone was knocking in a pattern trying to get out. Carter wedged a screwdriver into the seam and pried. The hatch lifted with a screech of nails. A gush of stale, cold air surged upward, carrying that sour metallic smell so strong Daniel gagged. A square of black yawned beneath them. Stairs. Narrow wooden stairs leading into darkness. "No," Daniel said sharply. "We're not going down there." Carter gave him a look. "We have to. That's where the signal's coming from. That's where your calls are coming from." But Daniel wasn't listening. His phone buzzed again in his hand. He hadn't even noticed it start ringing. "Same number, same time," he answered. This time the voice was frantic, shouting, words spilling over themselves. "He's in the dark. Don't go down there. Don't let him see you, please. Daniel, please." And then came a scream so shrill and violent that Carter stumbled back, covering his ears. The phone slipped from Daniel's hand, clattering against the floorboards. The call ended, but the scream hadn't stopped. It was still coming. Not from the phone. From below. Both men froze as the sound echoed up the stairwell, warped and distant, but undeniably real. A human voice, screaming in agony, tearing itself apart. Carter swallowed hard. We have to see." Daniel felt like he might vomit. Every part of him screamed to close the hatch, to bolt it shut, to never look again. But Carter had already set one foot on the top step, flashlight beam stabbing into the black. "Wait," Daniel croaked, but his voice was barely there. Carter descended. One step, two. His light cut across damp stone walls, streaked with something dark. Daniel's phone buzzed again on the floor. He didn't want to pick it up, but his eyes locked on the glowing screen. His father's number. And then, without answering, the voicemail alert chimed. A new message. Daniel played it on speaker. Carter's voice filled the room. "Daniel, help me." "Oh God, he's got me." The scream that followed matched the one echoing from the basement stairs. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. His eyes darted to the stairwell. The flashlight had dropped to the bottom, spinning in a lazy arc across the stone. Carter was gone. The hatch gaped open, and from the blackness below, Daniel heard footsteps begin to climb. Slow, heavy, certain. The footsteps grew louder, deliberate, pressing into the wood as if the thing climbing had all the time in the world. Daniel staggered backward, clutching the baseball bat he had left by the wall, his chest locking tight. The hatch yawned wide, a square of darkness that swallowed the light at its edges. "Carter?" Daniel croaked, his throat raw, but he knew Carter wasn't coming back. The air was colder now, a damp chill that carried that metallic tang, sharp and foul, like rot mixed with rust. Daniel's phone vibrated on the floor. The screen lit up. 1241, his father's number. He didn't want to answer, but his hand reached anyway, trembling, sweat slick on his skin. He pressed the screen to his ear, at first, silence. Then his own voice, panicked, whispering through tears. "Daniel, it's too late. He's already in your house." A low chuckle bled through the line, not his voice, something deeper. A sound like wet gravel sliding in a throat. The footsteps reached the last step. Daniel threw the phone aside and swung the bat toward the hatch. Nothing came out, just silence. He dared a glance down. The flashlight at the bottom flickered once, then died. And then movement. Something pale in the dark, rising slowly. A face, not Carter's, not anyone's. It looked almost human, skin stretched too tight, eyes black pits that reflected nothing. Its mouth opened in a jagged smile, teeth sharp, irregular as though cut from bone. Daniel stumbled back, his knees nearly buckling. The thing didn't climb further, it only watched him from the threshold of the dark, as though savoring the moment. The phone buzzed again, another voicemail. Daniel didn't want to hear it, but the sound played anyway, speaker crackling on its own. His own voice, broken, barely recognizable. "You shouldn't have opened the door." The figure rose higher, shoulders now breaching the edge of the hatch. Its limbs were wrung too long, elbows bent backward, fingers curling with nails that scraped the wood like knives. Daniel swung the bat with all his strength. The wood cracked against its face. But instead of falling back, it only laughed, a horrible gurgling noise that rattled his teeth. The bat splintered in his hands. Daniel bolted for the front door, fumbling at the lock, but the key jammed, his fingers slipping on the metal. Behind him, the floor creaked under the weight of something heavy dragging itself into the room. The phone rang again. He didn't answer, didn't have to. The voice filled the apartment anyway, leaking from every corner, vibrating in the walls. His voice pleading, begging, breaking. "Daniel, stop running. It doesn't matter. He's already you." Daniel froze. His skin crawled. Slowly, he turned. The thing stood fully in his living room now. But it wasn't the thing anymore. It was him. His own face stared back at him. His own eyes. His own trembling hands. Even the same ragged breath tearing through his lungs. Daniel stumbled backward. "No," he whispered. The double smiled. "Yes." The phone fell silent. The air grew thick, pressing down on him. His double stepped closer, and with every step, the original face began to tear skin splitting at the seams, the smile widening too far, exposing darkness beneath. Daniel's knees buckled. He wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The figure leaned close, its breath cold against his ear. Closer, it whispered, the same word he'd heard on that first call. Everything went black. When Daniel opened his eyes, he was standing in the stairwell, not at the top, at the bottom. The walls were damp, streaked with rot. His father's old tools lay scattered on the floor, rusted and broken. And then he heard it, footsteps above him, creaking across the living room floor. He ran to the stairs, pounding upward, but when he tried to open the hatch, it wouldn't budge. He pushed until his shoulders screamed, but it was sealed shut. His phone buzzed in his pocket. 1241, I'm caller ID. Daniel Harker, he answered. His own voice spilled from the speaker, ragged, panicked, exactly like before. "Help me, please, he's here." "Oh God, he's..." The scream ripped through him, raw and endless. And above, the footsteps stopped. Slowly, they turned toward the hatch. Something began to knock, once, twice, a patient rhythm like someone asking to be let in. Daniel's phone slipped from his hands. The call went dead, but the knocking did not stop. And in the silence that followed, a voice that was not his whispered through the dark, "Soon."